Okay, so this is the carbohydrates portion of the lecture. Carbohydrates have the abbreviation capital C, capital H, capital O because they're made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The monomers, or the building blocks for carbohydrates, are monosaccharides. Notice the spelling with the saccharides. So some different types of monosaccharides are glucose, fructose, and galactose. Carbohydrates have the general formula of CH₂O. So for every 2 hydrogens in a carbohydrate, there's 1 oxygen and 1 carbon. So for example, glucose is a 6-carbon sugar, so its chemical formula is C6H12O6. And fructose is a 5-carbon sugar. So fructose would be C5H10O5. Okay, so that follows the general formula for a carbohydrate. Sometimes for carbohydrates we have just 2 monomers, so 2 monosaccharides put together. For example, sucrose is a disaccharide, 2 sugars, and sucrose is a glucose and a fructose. Sucrose is just normal table sugar. Maltose is 2 glucose bonded together, and that bond is called a glycosidic linkage. So the bond between monosaccharides are called glycosidic linkages. Lactose is a disaccharide that's made up of glucose and galactose. Some people can't digest lactose because they can't break that that glycosidic linkage. So they're not able to separate them. And they're not allergic, they're actually just lactose intolerant. Okay. So our carbohydrates, the polymers, are actually called polysaccharides. Okay, so the polymers are called polysaccharides. And these polysaccharides are used for energy. So our cells break down the polysaccharides to make energy for the cell. And they're also used to build structures for living organisms. So we'll go through those individually. First polysaccharide we'll talk about is a structural carbohydrate called cellulose. As you can see from the diagram, cellulose is just a bunch of glucose monomers or glucose monosaccharides bonded together. But because of the way those glycosidic linkages happen between the glucose, we can't break those down. Cellulose makes up plant cell walls. Okay, so cellulose is making up plant cell walls. We're not able to digest cellulose, so that's the fiber we look for in our diets. So since we can't digest it, the cellulose fiber just goes through our digestive system and helps to clean us out. Okay, so cellulose is a structural carbohydrate. Another structural carbohydrate is chitin. Chitin is found in insect shells and crustacean shells. So crustaceans are things like lobsters, crabs, then those shrimp shells, and also in the cell walls of fungi. So this is one of the reasons why fungi are not considered plants, other than the fact they don't have photosynthesis, but instead of cellulose in their cell walls, like they have in plants, chitin makes up the cell walls of fungi. Okay, crustacean shells, so like the crab and the lobster specifically, have very hard shells because crustacean shells have calcified chitin. Just like our bones are calcified, which makes them very hard, the calcified chitin of the crustacean shells makes them extremely hard. Okay, two storage carbohydrates are starch and glycogen. Starch is how plants store excess sugar. And glycogen is how animals store excess sugar. Okay, and think of the places we find starch. Starchy foods, potatoes have lots of starch in them, so potatoes are how that potato plant was storing its excess sugar. Wheat has a lot of starch in it. Corn has a lot of starch in it. When you first pick corn, it has a lot of sugar, but within a few hours of picking it, a lot of that sugar is converted to starch. Okay, we can break down starch because of the glycosidic linkages in it. So we're able to break it down and turn it into sugar when we eat it. Glycogen in animals is stored in two different places. You have muscle glycogen, and then you have liver glycogen. So when you had breakfast this morning and you were eating those frosted flakes, you had an excessive amount of sugar, and that excess sugar was stored in your liver as glycogen. And now later on, later in the morning when you're out of the blood sugar that you had just from digesting your cereal, the liver can release some of that glycogen to keep your blood sugar up.